So, Luigi, Jay, thank you guys for joining the Protocol Podcast. Super excited to have you here. Avalanche has been a beast in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months within the cryptosphere. Would love to get your thoughts on what you guys are mostly excited about and talk about Avalanche. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kita.
Absolutely. So let's kick off and kind of go through a bit of introductions. Luigi and Jay, you guys have so much history within the universe of crypto, and also your backgrounds are quite astonishing, as well as the rest of your team. So how did you guys learn about crypto and kind of grew within the ecosystem?
Want to go first, Luigi?
I'll let you go, Jay. You're good.
All right. So I think we both have a similar kind of trajectory where we've landed, but I think I'll keep my background short here. So started trading Bitcoin in 2011, got into the Ethereum space right around when the white paper came out. That was when kind of the professional background of marketing and also the passion for crypto started to come together. One thing led to another, had my own agency for a little bit, focused on just marketing and crypto brands from the consulting perspective, and then moved on to a firm called Fluidity, where we were building a DEX called AirSwap, as well as building out a security tokens business. That was kind of the two primary directions. And then a little over a year ago, May 2020, joined Avalabs, where was leading marketing and trying to figure out how best to make sure that Avalanche is known far and wide.
I think according to your track record and how Avalanche grew in the last couple of weeks, it's big props.
Yeah, I was actually looking through some numbers last night, and a year ago yesterday we were at 17,000 followers on Twitter. Yesterday we hit 300K. So just to put it into perspective.
Who is in charge of making all of those snowboarding and skiing videos? We have to get them on a podcast as well.
I know it's our design team, and I think it's a little bit of filling in the blanks with the marketing team as well. So a group effort.
That sounds exciting. Luigi, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, my background's similar in the way it got started with Jay. I got interested in Bitcoin. I think it was 2012 or 2013. Was trading it there. My background is in markets and trading. I worked at Citigroup for about 7 years, trading credit default swaps and equities. So naturally, markets were something I was interested in. Got further involved in the Ethereum space around 2015 and 16. Started going to all the meetups, conferences, meeting a lot of people within the space, and then was able to raise money for my own DApp. That was built in 2017 and 18, and then quickly realized that crypto, the infrastructure for the types of dApps that we're building today weren't really available back then, and so was able to learn a ton in that experience, and then got very involved in DeFi naturally, given my background. It was very interesting to me, and so when the opportunity came with Avalabs, was very inclined to take it and join as director of DeFi, focused on really building out this DeFi ecosystem here at for Avalanche.
What's the dApp that you've created? I wonder if the time is right and this current time of the evolution and adoption.
I think about that a lot. I'm like, wow, we built it all. Here it is. But we built it for a chain called Archain. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but that's for all the OGs out there who.
I remember Archain.
And there were some other issues there that didn't allow it all to work out, but we'd have to write it in Solidity at this point to bring it back to life. It's still something that I think about because the UI is pretty sweet, but for now I got plenty of stuff to do and no shortage of minutes that are empty. So yeah, looking forward to what we have going on here.
So it's really interesting that you mentioned that you would rewrite it into Solidity, and at the same time, Avalanche has EVM compatibility, which we'll kind of touch upon later on. But first, I think we can talk about the what's currently called in the industry as a tier 3 consensus model that Avalanche is introducing, which supposedly essentially allows you guys to achieve this transaction finality under 1 second. And especially after so many updates have been rolled out, and the latest one being Snowman++, where the transaction cost is minuscule compared to the Ethereum chain. What's one of the most exciting things that you're excited about the architecture of the Avalanche, and how does it essentially revolutionize the whole space?
I mean, I'll just state my, kind of my thoughts. From my perspective, the ability to come to finality so quickly, while still maintaining decentralization and low cost of hardware, is something that, was one of the things that really attracted me and still attracts me to Avalanche. It's one thing to scale via hardware. I think we know how that works. It's one thing to, have really fast time to finality with that hardware, but to do it in a way where you still have 1,000 validators, given the chain's only a year old, so that could really scale. But also, not only do you have such decentralization across the network at this point, but also the cost of hardware. Like, you could run it on your laptop and no issue. And that's something that it provides real inclusion from a networking standpoint. So that's one thing. I could go on about many others, but if I had to pick one, that's something from the architecture standpoint that always excited me.
And I think from my perspective, that's totally right. I'll add maybe like 2 touch points here. With 1,000 validator stat, that's actually something that Avalanche had achieved probably in its early days. I think the count must have been that high earlier 2021. The thing that has kind of kept it from growing further than that is the minimum staking requirement. It's at 2,000 AVAX, and of course, if the token appreciates, it gets a little bit harder to meet that minimum staking requirement. So, as a team, one of the ideas, and this likely will happen, is to make sure that we can include the decision making of the minimum staking requirement within the governance structure or the capabilities. So once that's live, then the community can really dictate what makes most sense for that. So we're hoping that once that's enabled and people decide on what the requirements are or the adjuster requirements are, then that growth can really start to take off. I really do think so. That also is incredible with the upside opportunity. And then the second point is for those that are non-technical, like perhaps Luigi and myself too, I always recommend watching the 2-3 minute video of where Goon describes how Avalanche consensus works. And effectively, you have probabilistic consensus over deterministic consensus. And he kind of goes into the process of why that enables the consensus to scale as best as it does. And I think that's a video that I've had to watch many, many times over. So, but I think it is really helpful to watch. It's on YouTube, the Avalanche YouTube.
Perfect. We'll definitely link that in the description below. I think that's a very valuable resource that even kind of your organization even puts out this kind of educational topics. I think it's very valuable, especially for somebody who is just getting into crypto and they open up MetaMask and they think it's all fake and they can't really get their heads around. Right. The ability to not only give them this kind of instant feedback for their transactions, given from my personal perspective, about 2 years ago, using the MetaMask and waiting for that transaction to come through with a smart contract, you sitting there for 10 minutes and you don't know where your funds are. Whereas in this case, if somebody's transitioned from a traditional finance and they see their trade on some OMS being executed within a couple of seconds, I think on Avalanche, it kind of gives them the same feedback loop, especially within this new feedback economy. When you order food and it gets delivered to you within 30 minutes, you post a picture, you get a like immediately. I think that's very valuable. And also the scalability in terms of the costs of the transaction. It lowers the barrier for entry, definitely. One thing that I think a lot of people outside of Avalanche overlook is that the official launch that happened about a month ago, back in August, when you guys were waiting for Chainlink oracles to be integrated so that you can launch the dApps and give them the ability to efficiently manage the capital. How is Chainlink playing the role within your ecosystem and integrations?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's definitely overlooked. I think, especially considering the timelines coincided with the announcement of Avalanche Rush. The lines got blurred a little bit, but what I'd say is once Chainlink went live, it allowed us to have our first lending platform, which was Banky, on Avalanche. And this is something that was, basically the community was starved for it because DeFi doesn't really work, frankly, without, credit mobility and velocity of capital to run through the ecosystem. So with that really assisted in kind of springboarding the whole DeFi ecosystem. So I would say that, that has allowed lending to go live, which has allowed, then other primitives in DeFi to go live. And it also coincided with the launch of our bridge, which has become a meme effectively on crypto Twitter at this point. But it's got some good UX and works nicely. It's funny. Yesterday I was on Ethereum and I was going to sell a token, and I did the math, and it was cheaper for me to bridge it over to Avalanche, sell it, and bridge it back, than to just swap it on Ethereum. And that's pretty interesting. So, I think that those all, to answer your question, yeah, Chainlink has definitely assisted in springboarding the ecosystem.
I actually did the same cost analysis about a couple of weeks ago. We've posted it on Twitter that at some point in time, when the transaction costs for a swap on Uniswap would cost you about $130, it would be more efficient for you, and sometimes even more time efficient, because you still have to fight for the block space on Ethereum to bridge it back to Avalanche, swap it, and then bridge it back to Ethereum. I think that's itself speaks for this technology, not only on the transaction to finality on Avalanche, but also the bridge itself.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I've realized also with the bridge is, I remember when the first bridge, I guess in this past year that was made, or the first bridge I personally used was the Avalanche bridge, and I know the community was super excited about it. The most prominent positive feedback was the UX and experience is excellent. And I was thinking, okay, why is that? Like, is it because of the speed? Is it because of the UI or front-end UI, front-end UX? It wasn't really clear. I knew the speed was definitely one of the reasons, but wasn't sure if the rest was. So I went around actually this past weekend and started using a lot of the newer bridges. And of course, this is obvious, but blockchain tools are really hard to use. I think we all on this call maybe normalize a lot of those motions at this point because we fumbled around with it for hours and figured out how to best to use them. But when you use new technology in the crypto space, especially the tech that facilitates interoperability, you then really have an appreciation for kind of the simple and elegant design choices that perhaps the Avalanche bridge has. So you have your ETH address and through MetaMask, and you connect to the bridge, and you just simply send the funds over, and it just goes back to the same 0x address on the Avalanche side because of the EVM that's running on top of Avalanche. So those kind of subtle design choices really go far, and you don't actually, even if you're kind of like the I guess like the centralized exchange user who doesn't have super or a lot of exposure to DeFi, can still more or less figure out what to do and get the assets transferred over without too much complexities. Of course, there are areas of improvement, so I think the team is very much on top of that, and hoping that the bridge meme continues and people still continue to enjoy using the bridge to transfer assets.
I actually 100% agree that UI UX is a very crucial piece of infrastructure within the blockchain, because the backend architecture is so complex for even somebody who just graduated college with a finance degree to understand. And therefore, we need to the industry as a whole needs to come up and say, okay, we need to simplify the user experience and just hide the majority of the complications in the backend. Unless somebody wants to go ahead and explore those, well, here you go, you have a MetaMask.
Exactly.
But I think, for example, in Avalanche Bridge, the one thing that I really liked from my user experience is the availability to see the validation part.
The transaction validation, yeah.
Yep. So when you see it goes from 1 to 3 to 5, et cetera, up to 35, you see like the actual process, whereas in the majority other bridges, like we've used, for example, Ethereum to Matic, we've used the Arbitrum, you just basically sit there and wait, and you don't know at what point of stage the transaction is being pending.
Yeah, it's a little, especially if whichever side you're going from, especially if the network is slow or congested, it's a little nerve-wracking, right? If you don't have, it's kind of like you just send funds into a dark hole and you wait for however long you wait. And
Yep.
and I think the progress bar minimally will at least ease some anxieties.
Yeah, it kind of gives you some sort of time to finality.
Yeah,
No pun
yeah, exactly.
intended.
Peace of mind. Yeah.
But once kind of the users and the existing users bridge into Avalanche, they're essentially greeted on a brand new landing page, which doesn't actually exist in any other blockchain. I think it's a very smart conversion tool to actually say, okay, welcome to Avalanche. Here's our open arms. Here's the dApps that we have. Here's something that we have upcoming, which is Avalanche Rush. What are you guys mostly excited about Avalanche Rush? And let's talk about what it is first, because there's a lot of confusion in terms of what's the dollar amount. And we know, for example, from our side, has been 10,000 tokens. Well, no, 10 million. Slightly off. 10 million tokens, right? And do we price them at the current market price, or is that a net value that we should price the whole incentive system?
Yeah, so it's a good question. You can price them at the current price, but I will say that the incentives will be deployed over multi-year horizon, and so it's quite difficult to price what they'll be worth, when you're considering that time, right? So that's important. That's a very important point to make, right? I guess as of today, you can make the point that it's worth $600, something million, but it's going to be deployed over time. So what it ends up being in terms of dollars at the end remains to be seen, but it is 10 million $10 million for sure.
And the incentives, the way that they're being distributed, it's not converted back to a stable coin, right? The way that you guys distributing the incentives is through AVAX, the native token of Avalanche. That's
right. It's 10 million AVAX that's been allocated, and we deploy that in AVAX for sure. The idea is also, part of the liquidity mining incentive is to, distribute that asset in people's hands, users' hands, let them have it, let them own it, let them, learn more about an ecosystem. I know from my personal experience, the more, whenever I wanted to learn more about something, the first thing I did was buy a little bit, keep it on my screen. Maybe that's the trader in me, but that was the way that I was always able to kind of, keep my mind active about something. I'm not saying that's the overarching reason we've built Avalanche Rush, but that's kind of that's definitely the approach.
I think it's a great idea to spread out the reward system throughout a multi-year approach. Like it gives you guys an actual window to deploy and develop the ecosystem further while keeping the liquidity interested in additional yield. That gives essentially Avalanche and the dApps a lot more time to say, okay, well, we're starting from, I guess, version 0.1, and then we have essentially 2-year horizon to get us to a full scale of version 1.0, let's say. And throughout this iteration, we're rolling out more updates, more features that essentially create this attachment to a certain brand. And I guess this is something very interesting to talk about, because when you see new chains spinning up, right, there's this new incentive systems that are being rolled out to attract the liquidity, which is essentially what currently, at least, blockchains are essentially striving for. Do you think there's going to be some sort of brand attachment later on? Whereas right now you see a lot of capital just being moved from one chain to another just to grab this piece of additional rewards, additional yields.
Sorry, so what's the question?
Do you think in the long term there's going to be essentially a brand attachment from
Uh,
some of the liquidity providers instead of seeking this additional yield?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Something that I think about every day, right? Liquidity mining is good in terms of providing an incentive for people to, try the chain, see the user experience, obviously earn some extra yield. But the question longer term is, is that sustainable for long-term growth of each layer one chain? And, for sure it's not, right? It's not sustainable forever. So at the end of the day, I do think having strong branding associated with the layer one, and also having, also having a very core focused culture that developers want to participate in is something that long term, is what's going to accrue value to the chain. In addition to that, when you have native applications deploying on the chain, governance usually lives on that chain. And when you have governance live on the chain, that's where real value can accrue at the end. Fees get brought back to that chain from in the multi-chain world. So all that collates to say that at the end of the day, what we need is strong brand, because the switching costs in terms of layer ones, across a long time horizon will likely be low. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
And I think this brings back our conversation to the Avalanche Rush, and kind of talk about what's the overarching reason this was created. From my understanding, it's a bit of 50-50. It's essentially incentivize a brand new liquidity to come into the Avalanche ecosystem, but at the same time incentivize native dApps development. So tell us about Avalanche Rush. What's the story behind it? What are you guys trying to accomplish in the long term?
In terms of the actual incentive program?
Well, it's from my understanding, it's both, right? It's you're incentivizing the new liquidity through the rewards, and then you're also incentivizing your own blockchain, essentially dApp development within the Avalanche ecosystem. So you're trying to essentially create something like Benki that doesn't exist on any other chain, like Trader Joe, which is a very native applications.
I see. Yeah. It's a good question. So I think the approach we've taken is that Avalanche Rush is both a user acquisition and a developer acquisition program. The idea being that you need both. You can't have just one for it to succeed. So by bringing over some of the blue chips like Aave, Curve, Sushi, etc., that helps with the user issue, being able to solve that. But longer term, our focus is on building, fostering, and innovating with native applications. That's the most important thing long term, and that's where the majority of those incentives will be deployed. So there's kind of like a two-step process. One, we brought over blue chips and we'll get users to try out the chain. Hopefully they like the time to finality. Hopefully they like the bridge. Hopefully they love the experience. And then they stay for the experience and also the innovation. That's kind of the approach that we've taken.
And I think from the user perspective, the way I've been communicating Rush 2 is I think people tend to look around and say, hey, there's a lot of these layer ones and even dApps that are providing incentives. What happens when the incentives kind of come to an end? And the comparison I always like to bring that's relatable is kind of like the ride sharing user acquisition model, right? When Uber and Lyft started launching, and every single ride sharing company had incentives. But at the end of the day, the ones that ended up, I guess, lasting beyond those incentives are the ones that provided actual value beyond just the incentives. So with Avalanche, the value props that we've been talking about, near instant transaction finality, low cost, decentralization, I think is also important too for some people. All these things are going to shine through once you use them. So simply put, come over to Avalanche, try it out because of the incentives. And once you're here, you're really not going to want to leave. And you can take a look at the bridge metrics as well to see the inflows are at a ratio of 2-to-1 for the most part on an average time horizon. And we do think that as as the blue chips from Ethereum and also some of the other larger projects start coming and deploying on Avalanche, it just becomes even more compelling to stay because of all of the different apps that you could be using.
So let's talk about those compelling apps, because I think right around the corner we have Aave and Curve launching on Avalanche with their own incentive systems. I think, and Luigi, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 20 million for Aave and 10 for Curve.
It's 7 million for Curve, 20 million for Aave for the first phase.
For the first base.
For the first phase, yeah.
So how many phases are there going to be?
TBD, but definitely 2.
Well, yeah, you have to name one, and then you have to say roll out the second one. Otherwise,
Yeah,
that's going to be the only one.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was trying to allude to in the beginning. It's not just a 3-month incentive program. So, yep, that's kind of the thought.
Yeah, if we looked at the bridge metrics, we actually saw a couple days ago that there was a lot of liquidity. I think it was in USDT that migrated from Ethereum to Avalanche. A lot of people's assumption is that that's in the process of waiting for Aave and Curve to be launched on Avalanche. But I think there's a lot more other apps, exciting and native apps on Avalanche. For example, our favorite one here is Trader Joe, which has a lot of pools, has staking, has its own sort of deflatorary token pressure with buyback from the transaction fees. And also, I think in the last 7 days, if we looked at the protocol revenue, I think they've even surpassed Avalanche for the 7-day average revenue. Have you guys seen that metric yet?
I saw the tweet. Yeah, I saw the tweet. I don't.
Yeah, I saw the tweet too.
I can't verify it or not. I haven't looked into that. But it wouldn't, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Just it's two different,
It's also different. Yeah, Trader Joe has more contract calls, so just more fees that get used.
Yeah, and swaps, right?
And swaps exactly.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a correct compare. Like I'd compare Trader Joe to other DEXs, and that's cool. But yeah, it's great. It's great to see the fees. I mean, the activity on Trader Joe has been fantastic. We have good competition on chain with various DEXs and more of them launching. Kyber deployed as well. Sushi will deploy. Pangolin has also been competing, and they'll also be making many changes to kind of their structure. So it's great to see this competition on chain, and that's what makes us all better at the end.
Yeah, so Pangolin is going to be redesigning their UI and adding charts. I think that's right about on time for a 2-year DeFi cycle. We need charts in DeFi.
Yeah, it's also, I think they're also looking at tokenomics change as well from a governance vote that I saw that they put up. But I guess we'll see what happens there. So that'll be interesting.
So what's your take on the protocols essentially deploying and slowly kind of removing themselves from the equation and becoming DAOs? I think it's from what we've seen so far, and we've talked to a couple of the DEXs, one of them being guys at Bancor. That seems to be a prevalent theme that a developer would release a piece of code and then throughout some cycle iteration slowly remove themselves from the governance process and essentially give back the governance to a wide array of the people through the token, which could be easily accessible. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think given the regulatory environment, there's definitely concern with some applications being centralized and whatnot. But at the end of the day, part of the reason we came here to do this is a lot of people believe in decentralization, and it's great to see that this is actually being experimented on right now. That's like exciting for me. In terms of what's needed, you still need a core team or a team that's continuing to innovate. In my opinion, there's a fine balance between decentralizing too quickly, and versus being able to iterate and innovate quite quickly. So that's a balance I think everybody's trying to learn. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, the DAO dynamic is really just getting started, and it's been interesting. We've submitted multiple votes for Aves DAO. Gone through that process. It's been quite smooth, but it's definitely something you need to get accustomed to learning how to use, and it's in some aspects really cool to be doing everything fully transparent. In other aspects can make you kind of weary, but and it's much scarier. But I think for the long term, this is what we most of us wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that you guys submitted the governance votes for Aave. I think it's important to remind everyone that Aave did a poll within their DAO whether or not to migrate, or I guess not necessarily migrate, but develop a parallel Aave application on the Avalanche through a DAO, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that was voted upon.
Yeah, and wasn't like 100% to 0?
Like 99.
almost. Almost. There's probably one.
Somebody
vote.
clicked the wrong button. Somebody
Yeah.
clicked the wrong
Oops. Well, that's essentially kind of the power of DAOs, right? Like it doesn't necessarily weight a lot on the one person or subgroup that are not interested. It takes the majority group and takes that into the consideration. Kind of like a true decentralized approach to making decisions. There's one application, or I guess the project that I've heard you guys work on at Avalanche is the app that would allow pooling of funds for legal cases and litigation cases, like something that's currently being done through funds and hedge funds within the industry in the traditional finance.
Yeah.
But what you guys are trying to do is that a DAO? Is that going to be a DAO, or is it mostly going to be a kind of a separate pooling dApp, like a liquidity app?
I would say it's a little too early to comment on whether it's going to be a DAO or not. It seems like it's more of a marketplace. I guess it could have a token associated and could also be a DAO, I guess. But again, too early to say. The first phase of that initiative, so initial litigation offering is what it's called, ILO. We're working with a law firm called Roche Friedman and also Republic. Some people may know that brand from the kind of like private placements on the equity side. I think they do also fundraising for cryptos. I'm actually not sure on that, but they're pretty close in the crypto space. At least they have one foot in the realm and really trying to push far and wide in that space as a more traditional fintech company. And with ILOs, we're focusing on the first case, which is a case for this company called Apotheo. And Apotheo, they are they're a hemp research facility. I think it's like multi-billion-dollar research facility. And I believe a year or so ago, I think the county sheriff or some kind of sheriff, I can't remember what level, came over and actually unlawfully destroyed all of their crops. And so that's what the litigation is kind of revolved around. It's basically I think it's a state level entity versus the Apotheo company. And so effectively you're going to have the opportunity to help fundraise for this litigation. So if the litigation returns in the favor of the side that you pick, then you can get the upside of that litigation. So that's kind of the loose idea. And Apotheo is kind of the first test case. So that's what the team has been working towards, to make sure that the terms are right. All of the legal is properly settled on, at least on the terms side of things, and also the technology. And then if this works well, then the platform is kind of the natural next step, making sure that you can create this marketplace for all types of litigations. That's the general idea.
That's actually a very interesting sort of derivative marketplace that I
Right.
think has been accessible to retail and just even investment individuals, mostly for hedge funds, prop shops, or some sort of funds that have some sort of capital allocation.
Right. Large institutions
Yep.
and high net worth might have access to it too. It's also relatively new industry as far as I understand it to be.
Would that require additional oracles to be deployed just to keep in, I guess, the process of the litigation when it goes through several
Right.
steps? Like,
Yeah, I
do
mean,
you
that's an
guys go
interesting
like,
question.
do you guys are gonna go like that full automated route, or is that going to be mostly kind of user input of, hey, we're at this stage?
Yeah, I have to imagine that could be one step forward. I know that because we are still trying to figure out like how one deal works within this potential ecosystem of many deals that work within each other on one seamless marketplace. I think that could be natural in a step, but again, it's a little bit too early because one of the things that is obviously a little bit complex is the fact that this is the first iteration of this type of technology and type of marketplace. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing, we're really trying to plan this carefully, especially with the partners that are on board, and make sure that everything is done correctly. Also to make sure that we can help out the Apotheo team as well.
That sounds exciting. What other applications do you guys have in store for the Avalanche community that you guys can talk about?
So I mean, another side of things that I personally like to kind of bring up from time to time, and hopefully it'll become more public as we move forward in the next coming months, is some of the enterprise and institutional interests. So on the enterprise side, the subnets as a capability is something that the team has been talking about for some time, and it is on the horizon, hopefully before the end of this year or early next year, is roughly what we're aiming for. And what subnets will enable, at least with the enterprise side, what will enable enterprises to do is to deploy permission chains and have customizable rule sets within the chain that effectively is kind of like a branch right off of the primary network, is what we're calling the core permissionless network.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have actually a handful of enterprises that have already created proof of concepts. They're using them in their testing environments, and you basically have serious interest to use blockchain technology to enable these enterprises to do more than they're able to do today. So that's really cool. And I know, I mean, Luigi and I have probably had the same, been in the same echo chambers, but you consistently hear institutions are coming. That's probably been something that's been said for the last 10 plus years now. And I think that there's still quite a bit of ways to go to make them comfortable. But I really do think some of these touch points that we've seen on the Avalab side is reassuring that at least we're going along the right path. So that's something that I'm personally excited about.
So subnets, is that going to be essentially kind of like you mentioned as a branch out environments, like a private nets for the corporations, or would that still going to be within a public blockchain?
So the same set of validators that validate the public chain, you also then have to take those validators and they then have to also validate that subnet that you're basically running. Or I guess the way to say it is reverse. But so every subnet has the requirement of also validating the public, the primary network.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really up to if it's a private entity or an enterprise, it's up to them on how they want to govern that, and they can create whatever rule set that makes sense for them. But also on the flip side, another kind of more, low hanging use case is the idea of running virtual machines to help other blockchains scale. So the EVM is a perfect example. The EVM is the only implementation on the contract side currently, and that's the contract chain is what we're calling it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically showing
the C chain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically showing to the world that you can take the EVM, put it on top of Avalanche consensus, and scale Ethereum effectively in a very elegant manner. And so you can have other chains, so long as they're programmed in a VM or they have a VM instance, I guess is a better way to say it, then that can sit on top of another, I guess, subnet. And you can basically then have this kind of network of different blockchains that are all powered by Avalanche consensus.
That sounds very powerful. That
Yeah.
sounds essentially not just kind of developing your own blockchain and your own ecosystem, but also scaling other chains.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you guys excited about? Because again, Avalanche has the EVM, right? So the scalability and the portability of different dApps from Ethereum is very viable. But this is just essentially just wrapping it in the new lines of code. What are you guys excited about bringing from Ethereum ecosystem and scaling, giving it essentially more room to breathe? One example on our side is we've thought maybe Bancor should have used the EVM and scaled it on Avalanche, because the way that they use the single-sided liquidity provider, they solve essentially the impermanent loss solution. But because their contracts are pretty complex into the deployment, it costs a lot more gas to pay for those transactions. And whenever you unstake them, essentially you have to go through 2 sets of iterations of deploying a contract and paying for it, where that can be essentially solved on Avalanche because, again, transaction finality is very low, and the fees are as well. So what apps are you guys excited to bring over using the EVM? What would be your dream application? Except, of course, Aave and Curve that we know, and Sushi as well.
Yeah, maybe I don't know if it's the dream application, but for me, it's kind of like the obvious of, if you have a network that scales, so many of these cool ideas that exist on unscalable platforms and networks can't really work at its full potential, right? So one example is something like a Sablier. That's just kind of top of mind. If you don't know what Sablier is, its goal is to provide real-time payments. So one kind of far out use case is saying, imagine if you had your employer's paychecks coming through, but just streaming on a real-time basis, not this twice a month or every other week cadence.
Okay, that's a very interesting concept.
Exactly. Unfortunately, if you have high gas fees, it probably will eat up your whole paycheck. It's not actually usable. But with chains like Avalanche, I think that is something that can be tested, and you know, that's where you can actually run it and see if it's a viable product within the market. And that's what excites me, is because there's some things where it's like, it's not, you just have to keep on guessing whether or not it's viable based on, you know, strong, I guess, educated guesses, as opposed to actually testing in real time.
Yeah, Sablier is a very great example. I think, again, the architecture of Avalanche allows this kind of applications to function in relatively real time to finality. But Luigi, what do you think? What's one of the apps on your list that you would love to bring over? Or maybe there is something that in-house that you're working on.
You're on mute, Luigi, if you're trying to speak.
Oops. Yeah, you know, I always harp on innovation because that's the most important thing. So there's plenty of things in house that we're working on, but you know, and when I say in house, I don't mean at Ava Labs, but just, you know, there's other applications that are building natively on the Avalanche ecosystem. But you know, I'm excited about a lot of Ethereum dApps. It'd be cool to get something like a balancer on Avalanche, you know, that you know, they're with their pricing curve being a little bit different. It'd be also cool to get a few others, but I'm most excited about the things that don't exist yet. You know, and whether that's DeFi or whether it's social or, you know, other aspects that we can go in Web3. I'm excited about all of that. You know, I think that DeFi is still such a small snippet of what we're going to see in the next 5 years. And, you know, we can be overly focused on, you know, all these different, you know, staking platforms and AMMs and DEXs and lending platforms. But I think that's really just going to be a primitive that allows the Web3 to scale into, you know, being used in everyday life. And that's what's more exciting to me.
I think, Jay, that you mentioned the ILO. the initial litigation offering. I think that's a very fresh concept to bring in into the decentralization framework and allow essentially users to participate in those kind of auctions. I think another great example would be a perfect fit for Avalanche would be a social network. And I think Stani, who's the founder, mentioned that they are building something like that. And considering, again, the low transaction costs and time to finality that Avalanche has, that social network would flourish with relatively low costs within your ecosystem. What do you think?
Yeah.
Did I hit the sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but I'm really excited to see what Mustani and the crew put together on the social graph. I'm just from knowing him in general, I'd imagine that gets deployed in multiple places. Unclear as to where that gets deployed at this moment, but I can't say how excited I am about that because it's something I've been waiting for since, I first read the Ethereum white paper. That's something that always excited me. So yeah, we'll see. I have no alpha to drop on that at all.
Jay, what about you? Any comments?
Yeah, not related to anything that we're necessarily doing, but I think general comments. It actually does fascinate me that kind of sector of decentralized social. Just because so many people have tried it. Also, if you were around during like the 2016 to 2018 era, a lot of projects deployed and didn't really go too far. I think one of the main issues is people kind of conflate the idea of blockchain because it's immutable, because it's secure, and all the things we know about it to be kind of like the solution for everything. And it's not. There's still that layer of who's programming the data on chain, who's managing the front end, how do the incentive structures work. There's a lot more complexities than just propping up a Facebook clone and somehow settling that on chain. I don't even know how you do that, but I think one key example is voting. If you think about voting and tying that into token economics, then you have incentives baked in to want to make more money. So you're going to have people that come in and I don't know, maybe figure out how to fraudulently vote to increase the amount of money that, say, that post is getting. For example, like I remember early days, Steam It was one implementation. It was kind of like a Reddit board, but all of the functions were tied to the tokens. And I recall at one point it was just a huge feed of people trying to create as much content as possible to make as much money as possible. And I don't think that's the right use case. And I don't think the team really thought that was likely the right outcome either, but it's just the inevitable, I think, in these types of cases. So same thing with, I guess I forgot that decentralized Twitter, but
Twitch?
No, it was one that like came out of nowhere and all the VCs were on it. Anyways, it was.
Oh yeah, I remember that one too.
Yeah,
I forgot the name. Where you
exactly
where you paid for likes?
Yeah. Well, you just like recover your Twitter on this decentralized Twitter using your main Twitter, and then you can just get paid, I guess. Is probably like the loose structure of it. But point is the fact that I don't even know it and don't know too much about it is probably that it kind of just went away on the wayside. And maybe they're building other improvements, and I'm never one to dismiss something this early, kind of like maybe crypto Twitter holistically might be doing sometimes a little bit too soon, but it is a tough challenge at the end of the day. So that's what excites me more, because I think once someone cracks it, then you're going to see this huge rush and kind of the floodgates opening towards that sector. And that's something that excites me holistically.
It seems like whenever somebody cracks the formula for like the underlying kind of technology, like for example, when Uniswap came over, and then we have all of these DEXs just
AMM, exactly.
Just like copy and paste GitHub.
Yeah, exactly. For better or for worse, I don't know, but I think generally speaking, people have been pretty savvy and innovating beyond just the fork. Like whether it's, the protocol might stay the same, but maybe the UI changes, maybe the UX changes a little bit, maybe the whole branding changes. And I actually wrote a thread on Trader Joe the other day, and my stance was more so on the marketing community side, just because that's what I know best. And as I was clicking through a long time ago, I remember thinking, oh, this is actually quite fun. And I don't necessarily know, again, if it's good or bad for finance to be fun, but hey, maybe we can take the stance of saying who says finance can't be fun, or at least more enjoyable than, I don't know, like your traditional finance portal where you're probably mostly angry while using it.
Well, that's probably more of a Luigi question when he used to trade swaps.
Yeah, exactly. Smashing his keyboard.
Well, let me be clear. Trading is in general pretty fun.
Yeah. I feel like that just outsider in, it seems like you guys have fun.
Yeah, but in terms of gamifying finance, there's clearly some regulatory issues to discuss with that. But my personal opinion is that like gamifying doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to equate into, gambling or, doing things that, could potentially harm people over the long run, right? Gamifying could also be used to help people save money, could help them invest money wisely. Gamifying in general for applications has worked. And so, I imagine that to be here to stay in the long term, in terms of some of the crazier stuff that you see that gamifies people into bad habits. That's something we'll see how that gets handled in the long run.
But I think the whole intention of the blockchain community is to bring more transparency to these kind of systems like loot boxes, or even gamification of traditional finance, or even the kind of more of crypto finance, like with swaps and liquidity provisions as well. We live in this area where everything is sort of gamified, if you think about it, if you're a character in your own video game. But the incentives definitely kind of bring the awareness to a lot of institutions and individuals saying, okay, you are playing with your capital, you're playing with your liquidity, and here are the risk rewards for you. And what blockchain does essentially puts all of those things in motion and makes it transparent. And that's, I think, what I love about it the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we're running out of time, unfortunately, but thank you, Luigi and Jay, for joining today. Any closing thoughts, anything that you guys would like to share, or point any new listeners or distant listeners? The floor is yours.
I would say from my side, I think the most useful resources, if you want to tap into Avalanche DeFi, and the page is getting improved as we speak, actually, and it was mentioned on the call, is ecosystem.avax.network or avax.network. That page has all of the dApps, and that kind of experience where you're taken from, let's say, the bridging or even some of the exchanges. We really want to make sure that there isn't any work that needs to be done from the user's end. So they just simply go, oh, well, I can use these tokens and these dApps, or these are the dApps that are participating in Rush. So really, really want to stress that domain, because it's super important, especially for someone that's new.
Yeah, for me, it's, I would just say in general, I echo what Jay said, but, if there's any feedback as people continue to start to use Avalanche across the ecosystem, things that we're desperately missing or we can improve upon, please write to Jay, myself on Twitter. We'd be happy to take that feedback in and really do a better job on our side. I think you'll see with Avi and Curve deploying, I hope everybody gets to try out the chain, the experience. And, that excites me. I'm shocked that question was not asked on this podcast at this point. Because it's every DM, like I have like 900 of them. But that's going to happen this week. So we're very excited about that, and look forward to people trying out the chain and providing feedback on how we can be better.
Absolutely. For everybody that's listening, we're supposed to be live on September 29th. And by that time, you should see Aave and Curve on Avalanche. Hope you guys try it and enjoy it. Maybe.
I said this week.
Very soon. Yeah, very soon.
Well,
TM.
This week.
T minus T plus 5 days.
Exactly.
Exactly. There it is. There it is.
Whenever you guys are listening to this,
So I could breathe again.
If it's not live yet, just tweet at Luigi DeMeo and just send him some friendly frogs.
Yeah, pretty much.
But it was an absolute pleasure having you guys. Hope we'll get to chat soon again. But wish you all the best. You guys are working hard at Avalanche, and really looking forward to see what comes out of it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for the time.
Awesome.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, Akita. Appreciate it too.
Thank you everyone who just joined for another great episode of Protocol. We had an amazing guest from Avalanche, Joey and Luigi. Thank you guys so much for joining for today's episode. Everyone who's listening, if you want to find out more about Avalanche, go ahead and explore their domain. They have an amazing bridge from Ethereum to Avalanche. It's very cost effective and the UI is frankly great. But if you enjoyed this episode, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and consider subscribing on your platform of choice. But until then, let's see you guys in the next one.